Okay, welcome to part 3 of lecture for 7, Intro to Loops. So we've talked about, we've already written sort of a long-winded program that collects a bunch of numbers from the user and then calculates the average. And we've also introduced counter-controlled repetition using while loops. So our next step in terms of making our averages program fully functional is to modify it. First, that it just collects 10 numbers with a while loop. Maybe we'll make that 5, just for brevity's sake. And then after that, we'll modify it so it can average any number of numbers, and I'll show you how to do that real fast. Okay, so here's our code. We've got a scanner, we've got a class, a main method, we've created our scanner, so life is pretty good. Okay, so system, so we'll create our counter, which will just be 0, then while. We'll also create a total, which is going to be 0. And this is like what we saw before. So while I is less than, let's say 5. Go I++, system.out.printf. We'll make a new line. Insert number %d. This way we can just count out buildhouse number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. I'll just be I, so that'll be good. And then from here, we can, if we want to, int num is equal to in.nextInt, then total plus equals num. We can do it that way. The other way that we can do it is total plus equals n.nextInt. That's a little bit faster. I like doing it this way. I like doing it the first way better, but we could do that if we want to. Okay? And so from here, we'll just, we've got our total, which will set to 0. We've got our number I, which is set to 0, which will also set to 0. This will be a counter. We'll count up to 5. We'll increase it. We'll do some printing. We'll collect our next integer with the in.nextInt, and we'll just add that integer to our running total. And at the end, this is sort of the cool part. This is definitely the cool part. We'll be able to go system.out.printf. I guess it helps also if we go int average is equal to total divided by 5. And system.out.printf \f average is %d. We'll make a couple of new lines there. Average. And then we'll just need another closing curly brace, and life will be pretty good. Okay, so with these lines of code, what we've effectively done is made it so that we can collect 5 numbers from the user, then we just average them together. And so this means this is 6 lines of code total. I'm sorry, 6 lines of code total if you count this closing curly brace. And it's not too bad at all. 7 if we count, I don't know, yeah, all told. It's maybe 10 lines of code. We're collecting all these numbers. Life's pretty easy. Life is pretty great when you do it this way. Okay, so we're just going to save and compile. And then from here, got an error, identifier expected. So what that probably means is that we have this period right there. That's all it is. Cool. That's an easy mistake to make. Okay. So we saved it. Now let's run it real fast. Okay. Number 1 might be 5, 12, 7, 8, and then another 7. And our average is going to be somewhere in the 7 or 8 range. So that's good. That's good news. So we know it works. We can try it again by entering a 2, 3, 4, 5, and then a 6. And this should give us an average of 4. Yep. So our program works correctly. That's exciting. So let's go back in and modify it so that way we can collect any number of numbers. Because see how we have this 5 right here? That can be anything. Okay? And we'll just call this end value. Okay? And then from here, you can say system print, make a \f here, how many numbers to average. Okay, and to end value, and .nextEnd. Okay, and so from here, instead of ending at 5, we end at end value, however many that might be. So now we have a counter-controlled loop wherein we don't necessarily know, like when we write this piece, when we write the software, when we compile, we don't necessarily know how long this loop is going to take to run. What we do know, though, is that our user is going to give it some number. Okay, so that's pretty useful. That's definitely pretty useful. And when I say useful, what I mean very specifically is that our user is able to decide for himself, for herself, for herself, if you want to use the gender-neutral pronoun, HIR, the user is able to decide however many numbers they want to average. Right? Now that's pretty cool, and that it puts all the flexibility on the user. Like they still know exactly what they have to do, but it gives the user all that flexibility. So we're going to save, compile again. Okay, and let's say we want to average 5 numbers again. Okay, so we can go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That'll give us an average of 4. Now let's say that we want to average 7 numbers. Okay, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And then 8. We have an average of 5. Now let's say that we want to average 12 numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So there we should have an average of 6.5, which rounds down to 6 because we're using integer division. Okay, now this is really cool. This is really cool. And the reason this is really cool is because now the user is able to decide however many numbers they want to average, and then we can just make that happen. Okay, so we've fulfilled both of these criteria. We've got it to where our program is working correctly. But here's a question. Let's say the user wants to test the average of like 0 numbers, or -3 numbers, or -495 numbers. Let's say the user makes that decision. Okay, now we know, sort of from our own experience, that we can't average 0 numbers. That'll give us the divide by 0 error. But let's see what happens when we do this. Okay, so we want 0 numbers, so it's not going to ask us for any. And then it's going to give us an arithmetic exception division by 0 error because of the way that we try to calculate averages. Or let's say that we want -10 numbers that we're averaging. Okay? And if we do it that way, it tells us that our average is 0, but really what it should tell us is, hey, wait a second, we can't average -10 numbers. We have to take a positive number of numbers. And so the next loop structure that we're going to talk about here in just a second is what we call the sentinel controlled loop, which is, or sometimes called indefinite repetition. And that just keeps looping until some condition is met. We'll solve that particular problem with sentinel loops. Be back in a second.